The rain came down in sheets that October evening in 2019, the kind of Seattle rain that soaks through your jacket in seconds. Sarah Chen was walking home from her office at precisely 6:47 p.m. She remembered the time because she just checked her phone, annoyed that the bus was running late again. She was 28 years old, worked as a data analyst for a tech startup, and her life followed a comfortable, predictable rhythm. Wake up, work, Netflix, sleep, repeat. But then she heard it. At first, it was just a whisper of sound, floating above the traffic noise and the patter of raindrops. Sarah slowed her pace. The melody grew clearer as she approached the corner of Pine Street and 4th Avenue. It was coming from somewhere above her, delicate and haunting, cutting through the gray evening like a beam of light through fog. She stopped walking, completely stopped. Right there on the sidewalk, her umbrella tilted awkwardly to one side, water dripping onto her shoulder. She didn't care. The music had her. People flowed around her like she was a rock in a stream. A businessman bumped her shoulder without apologizing. A woman with a stroller shot her irritated look. Sarah barely noticed. Her eyes traced the sound upward to a second-floor window of an old brick building she walked past 100 times before. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could just make out the silhouette of a grand piano and someone seated at it, their fingers dancing across the keys. The melody was both sad and hopeful at the same time, if that makes sense. It felt like missing something you never had, like nostalgia for a memory that wasn't yours. Sarah stood there for 10 full minutes, soaking wet as the music washed over her. She didn't know what the piece was called. She didn't know anything about classical music, but she knew with absolute certainty that something had just shifted inside her chest. When the music finally stopped, Sarah felt the absence like a physical thing. The street sounds rushed back in car horns, distant sirens, the hiss of tires on wet pavement. She looked up at the window again and saw a small sign she'd never noticed before. Westlake School of Music. All ages welcome. Her phone buzzed. A text from her roommate asking if she wanted Thai food for dinner. Sarah typed back a quick yes, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She took a picture of the building with her phone and hurried to catch the bus that had finally arrived. That night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the music. She tried to find it online, humming the melody into her phone's music recognition app, but the recording was too muffled to identify. She searched beautiful, sad piano music and went down a rabbit hole of YouTube videos. Beethoven, Mozart, Rachmaninoff, they were all beautiful, but none of them were the piece she'd heard. It was 3 a.m. when she finally found it. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. She must have listened to it 50 times before the sun came up, each performance slightly different, each one making her chest ache in that strange, wonderful way. Sarah had never thought about learning piano. Music wasn't part of her world. She'd grown up in Bellevue, just across the lake, in a household where practical things came first. Her parents, David and Linda Chun, had immigrated from Taiwan in the 90s. David worked as an electrical engineer at Boeing. Linda was a pharmacist. They believed in hard work, good grades, and career stability. Art was something you enjoyed, not something you did. Sarah remembered being 7 years old, watching a movie where a girl played piano. She'd asked her parents if she could take lessons. Her mother had smiled and patted her head. Piano is very expensive, sweetie, and you're already doing so well in math. Maybe when you're older, but when you're older never came. There was always something more practical to focus on: science camp, SAT prep, college applications, internships. Now she was 28, sitting in a corporate office analyzing data spreadsheets, and suddenly nothing felt more important than learning to play that piece of music. 3 days later, during her lunch break, Sarah walked back to the Westlake School of Music. Up close, the building looked even older than she'd thought, probably built in the 1920s, with ornate brick detailing and tall windows. The lobby smelled like old wood and lemon polish. A young guy with purple hair sat at the front desk, scrolling through his phone. "Hi," Sarah said, her voice coming out smaller than intended. "I'd like to ask about piano lessons." The guy barely looked up. "Cool. For your kid?" "No, for me." That got his attention. He looked at her properly now, one eyebrow raised. You play already, or starting from scratch? From scratch. Complete scratch. I don't even know how to read music. He nodded slowly, clicking his mouse a few times. Okay, we do have adult beginner classes. They meet Thursday evenings. Or if you want private lessons, I can see you as openings. Sarah's heart was pounding. This was real. She was actually doing this. Private lessons, I think. All right, let me check. More clicking. We've got Marcus. He's great with adult students. Very patient. Or there's Vera. She's intense. Old school Russian training. She mostly teaches advanced students, but she takes some beginners if she likes them. I'll meet with Vera, Sarah heard herself say. The guy looked skeptical. You sure? She's not exactly warm and fuzzy. She made a grown man cry last month. That's fine. When can I meet her? 2 days later, Sarah sat in a small studio on the building's 3rd floor, her palms sweating, waiting for Vera Pushkin. The room held a beautiful Steinway grand piano, a few chairs, and nothing else. Through the window, she could see Elliott Bay in the distance, gray and choppy under cloudy skies. The door opened and a woman walked in. She had to be at least 75, maybe older, with white hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the kind of posture that made you want to sit up straighter. She wore a black dress and sensible shoes, and her eyes were sharp and assessing. Sarah Chen? Her accent was thick, rolling the R in Sarah's name. Yes, that's me. Sarah stood awkwardly, not sure whether to offer a handshake. Vera ignored the gesture and sat at the piano. Sit here. She patted the bench beside her. Sarah obeyed, suddenly feeling like she was 7 years old again. Show me your hands. Sarah held them out, confused. Vera took them, turning them over, examining her fingers like a jeweler appraising stones. Her own hands were thin and spotted with age, but her grip was firm. You have good fingers, Vera said finally. Long, strong, good span. She pressed down on Sarah's knuckles, checking their flexibility. But you are very late. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Too late? I did not say too late. I said very late. Vera released her hands and fixed her with that sharp gaze. Why do you want to learn piano? Sarah had prepared for this question, had thought about how to explain it in a way that didn't sound silly. But sitting there under Vera's scrutiny, all her rehearsed answers evaporated. I heard someone playing Chopin, she said quietly. Nocturne in E-flat major. Last week on the street below. And I just knew I had to learn how to play it. Vera's expression didn't change. This piece, you know, it takes years to play properly. Maybe 5 years, maybe 7, maybe never, if you do not work hard enough. I'll work hard. Everyone says they will work hard. Vera played a few bars of the Nocturne, her old fingers moving with impossible grace. The music filled the small room, and Sarah felt that same ache in her chest. You are 28 years old? Yes. Yes. Most concert pianists have been playing for 20 years by 28, some longer. The brain, it learns different when you are young. More easy, more natural. She stopped playing and turned to face Sarah fully. I tell you this not to discourage. I tell you so you understand what you ask for. Sarah met her eyes. I understand. I still want to try. For the first time, something that might have been approval flickered across Vera's face. Good, we start with basics. You come twice per week. 1 hour each time. You practice every day, every single day, for at least 45 minutes. Maybe you have natural talent, maybe you do not. We will see, but talent without work is nothing. When do we start? Now. Vera stood and gestured to the piano. Sit, I show you middle C. And just like that, at 28 years old, with no musical background and no idea what she was getting into, Sarah Chen began her journey. She learned where to place her fingers on the keys. She learned that the white keys were called naturals, and the black keys were sharps and flats. She learned that she couldn't make her left hand and right hand do different things at the same time, and that this was going to be much, much harder than she'd imagined. But when Vera played those few bars of Chopin again, before Sarah left, just to remind her what they were working toward, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Some things in life you just have to pursue, even if you're late, even if it's hard, even if everyone tells you it's impossible. She walked out of that music school into the Seattle evening, her head full of note names and finger positions. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt truly alive. 3 months into her piano journey, Sarah sat at her kitchen table staring at a piece of sheet music that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. It was February 2020, a cold Wednesday evening, and she'd been trying to play a simple batch minuet for the past hour. Her fingers felt like they belonged to someone else, clumsy, disconnected, refusing to cooperate with what her brain was telling them to do. She looked at her hands, really looked at them. These were the same hands that could type 80 words per minute without thinking. The same hands that could chop vegetables, text while walking, and do 100 other complex tasks on autopilot. But ask them to press down the third and fifth fingers of her left hand, while her right hand played something completely different? Apparently, that was asking too much. Sarah's roommate, Jennifer, walked into the kitchen to grab a beer from the fridge. "Still at it?" she asked, not unkindly. "I've been practicing the same 8-measure section for 45 minutes, Sarah said, her voice tight with frustration. "I can play each hand separately just fine, but together? My brain just stops working." Jennifer sat down across from her, popping open her beer. "Didn't you say it takes time? You've only been doing this for, 3 months? 12 weeks and 4 days, Sarah had been counting. "And I'm worse than the kids in Vera's beginner group class." This was the part that really stung. Vira had invited Sarah to observe one of her group sessions for children, thinking it might be motivating. It had been the opposite. Sarah watched a 10-year-old girl named Emma play through a simple Mozart piece with the kind of ease that made it look effortless. The girl's fingers just knew where to go. She didn't have to think about it. She just played. "How long has Emma been taking lessons?" Sarah had asked Vera afterward. 6 months, Vera had replied, not meeting Sarah's eyes. 6 months. The girl had been playing for 6 months and was already beyond where Sarah was after 12 weeks of intense practice. And it wasn't just Emma. There was a 9-year-old boy named Tyler who sight-read music like he was reading a picture book. An 8-year-old girl named Sophia who played with more musicality than Sarah could even imagine achieving. Sarah had gone home that day and cried in the shower where Jennifer wouldn't hear her. Now, sitting at her kitchen table with her beer-drinking roommate watching sympathetically, Sarah felt that same despair creeping back in. She'd been so confident that first day, so sure that hard work would be enough. But she was learning a brutal truth that nobody likes to talk about. Some things in life really are easier when you start young. The next morning, Sarah met her friend David for coffee at their usual spot on Capitol Hill. David was a resident at Swedish Medical Center, perpetually exhausted, but always willing to make time for his friends. Sarah had known him since college, and he was one of the few people she could be completely honest with. "Tell me about neuroplasticity," Sarah said, barely waiting for him to sit down with his triple espresso. David blinked. "Good morning to you too. What happened to, how are you, and nice weather we're having?" "David, please, I need to know." He sighed and took a long drink of his coffee. "Okay, neuroplasticity. It's the brain's ability to form new neural connections, basically. When you learn a new skill, your brain creates pathways between neurons. The more you practice, the stronger those pathways become. And it's easier when you're a kid, right? Generally, yes. Children's brains are more plastic. They form new connections faster and more easily. There are critical periods for certain types of learning, especially during early childhood." He must have seen her face fall because he quickly added, "But adults can still learn new skills, Sarah. It just takes more time and more deliberate practice." "How much more time?" David hesitated. "That depends on the skill and the person. But, yeah, for something like learning a musical instrument, starting as an adult puts you at a significant disadvantage compared to someone who started at age 5 or 6. Sarah stirred her latte, watching the foam swirl. "So I'm fighting a losing battle." "I didn't say that. I said it's harder." "There's a difference." David leaned forward. "Look, I started learning Spanish at 30. Am I ever going to speak it like a native who grew up bilingual? No, but I can still become fluent. I can still communicate, still enjoy it, still use it in meaningful ways. The goal doesn't have to be perfection." But Sarah wanted perfection. Or at least, she wanted to play Chopin the way it was meant to be played. She wanted to make music that moved people the way she'd been moved that rainy October evening. And every piece of information she found online told her the same thing David was telling her now. She started too late. That afternoon, Sarah found herself falling down a Reddit rabbit hole. There was an entire community of adult piano learners, which should have been comforting. But the success stories were all people playing simplified arrangements or very basic classical pieces. The really impressive posts people playing advanced Chopin, Rachmaninoff list were almost always from people who played as children and were getting back into it after years away. The keys felt cold under my fingertips, a stark contrast to the burning frustration I felt inside. At 28, I thought learning piano would be a joyful escape, a new skill to be proud of. Instead, it felt like a constant, glaring reminder of my own inadequacy. Every practice session was a battle. My fingers, clumsy and uncooperative, would stumble over passages I'd practiced for hours. The notes on the page blurred into a jumble of symbols that my brain just couldn't translate into beautiful music. I'd watch videos of child prodigies, their tiny hands dancing across the keyboard with an effortless grace I couldn't even dream of. A bitter thought would always creep in. You're too old for this. You started too late. Why are you even trying? The worst part wasn't the mistakes themselves, but the crushing weight of expectation I placed on my own shoulders. Each flubbed note wasn't just a wrong sound. It was a failure. I wanted to play flawlessly, to hear the perfect rendition I imagined in my head. But the reality was a clunky, hesitant mess. The joy I'd initially felt, the simple love for the sound of a piano, was slowly being smothered by a relentless pursuit of perfection that I could never seem to reach. The piano, once a symbol of hope and creativity, now felt like a judge, and every time I sat down, I felt its silent, critical gaze. Today was my weekly lesson with Vera, and a familiar sense of dread settled in my stomach. Vera was kind, patient, everything a good teacher should be. But how could I face her when I had made virtually no progress? I felt like I was wasting her time and my own. The piece I was working on, a seemingly simple prelude, had become my personal Everest. I had practiced it until my fingers ached, but the rhythm was still off. The dynamics were flat, and a particularly tricky arpeggio in the middle felt like an insurmountable wall. I walked into her cozy studio, the scent of old books and lemon polish doing little to soothe my nerves. The grand piano stood in the center of the room, looking both beautiful and intimidating. I knew I'd have to play for her, and the thought made my hands feel clammy. I was preparing my usual list of excuses. A busy week at work, not enough time to practice. Maybe this piece is just too hard for me right now. But deep down, I knew those were just deflections. The real problem was the growing voice in my head telling me that I just wasn't good enough, and I was terrified Vera would finally see it too. Vera greeted me with her usual warm smile. "Sarah, lovely to see you. How was your week with Chopin?" I managed a weak smile in return and sat down at the bench, the polished wood cool against my legs. I took a deep breath and placed my hands on the keys. "Let's hear what you've been working on," she said, settling into a chair beside me. I started to play. The first few bars were okay, a bit shaky but recognizable. Then came the dreaded arpeggio. My fingers tangled, the notes coming out in a discordant jumble. I stopped abruptly, my shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, staring at my hands. "I practiced this part over and over. I can't get it." I tried again, my jaw clenched with determination. The same thing happened. A hot wave of shame washed over me. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. "I just don't understand what's wrong with me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I feel so stupid. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. I see kids playing things 10 times harder than this, and I can't even get through a simple prelude. It's hopeless." The confession tumbled out, a torrent of all the frustration I'd been bottling up for weeks. Vera listened patiently, her expression gentle. She didn't interrupt or offer empty platitudes. When I finally fell silent, staring miserably at the keys, she spoke. "Sarah," she said softly, "I want you to close your eyes for a moment." I hesitated, but then did as she asked. "Now," she continued, "I want you to forget about the notes on the page. Forget about perfect. Forget about the kids on YouTube. I want you to just listen. She began to play. It wasn't the prelude I had been struggling with. It was something else. A simple, haunting melody that seemed to float in the air. The notes were clear and pure, each one resonating with a quiet beauty. It wasn't fast or flashy, but it was full of emotion. It spoke of melancholy, but also of hope. I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to release, my clenched jaw relax. The music washed over me, quieting the critical voice in my head. I wasn't analyzing it or judging it. I was simply experiencing it. It was a powerful reminder of why I had wanted to learn piano in the first place. Not to achieve technical perfection, but to be able to create something that beautiful, to connect with that feeling. The melody filled the room, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about my failures. I was just listening to the music. When the last note faded, Vera let the silence hang in the air for a moment. I opened my eyes. What was that? I asked, my voice soft. It was beautiful. It's just a little something I wrote, she replied. But that's not the point. The point is, how did it make you feel? I thought for a moment. It felt calm, I said, and a little sad, but in a good way. It made me feel something. Vera smiled. Exactly. Sarah, you're not failing because you're not talented or because you started too late. You're struggling because you've turned learning into a performance. You're so focused on hitting every note perfectly that you've forgotten to make music. Words hit me with the force of a revelation. She was right. I had been treating practice like a test, with a pass or fail grade for every attempt. You rejudging every single note before it even has a chance to be part of a phrase. She continued, music isn't about perfection. It's about expression. It's about telling a story. Your story. Do you remember why you wanted to learn piano? The question made me pause. I remembered being a little girl, mesmerized by the sound of my grandmother's playing. I remembered the feeling of hearing a piece of music that moved me to tears. I wanted to be a part of that magic. I hadn't thought about that in months. Vera's gaze was kind but direct. You're putting so much pressure on yourself to be flawless, she said. But that's not where the joy is. The joy is in the process. It's in the discovery, in feeling the keys under your fingers, in hearing a chord come together for the first time. The mistakes are part of it. They're not failures, they're signposts. They show you where you need to go next. She reached over and placed a hand on the sheet music. This, she said, tapping the page, is a map. It's not the destination. The destination is the feeling you want to create, the story you want to tell. She looked at me. Tell me, Sarah, forget this piece. What song do you love? What song makes you want to dance or cry or just close your eyes and listen? I thought about it, and a song immediately came to mind. A simple, beautiful film score I had adored for years. There's a theme from a movie, I began, a little shyly. I've always loved it. Then that's what we'll do, Vera said decisively. We'll put Chopin away for a little while. Let's find that music. Let's not worry about how hard it is or how long it will take. Let's just focus on playing something you love. Let's focus on reconnecting with that feeling. For the first time, a genuine spark of excitement flickered within me. The idea felt liberating. It wasn't about passing a test anymore. It was about connecting with a piece of music that already meant something to me. I left Vera's studio that day feeling lighter than I had in months. The heavy cloak of frustration had been lifted, replaced by a fragile but persistent sense of hope. The world outside seemed brighter, the sounds of the city less like noise and more like a symphony. I walked home not with a list of corrections and technical exercises to master, but with a new mission, to find joy again, to play for the sake of playing. That evening, I sat down at my piano. It didn't look like a judge anymore. It looked like a friend, waiting patiently. I didn't open my Chopin book. Instead, I pulled up a simplified version of the film score I loved. I looked at the notes, and for the first time, I wasn't intimidated. I placed my fingers on the keys and slowly, haltingly, picked out the first few notes of the melody. It was clumsy. It was full of pauses. It was far from perfect. But it was the song. And as I played that simple, familiar tune, a smile spread across my face. I wasn't performing. I wasn't striving. I was just making music, and it felt wonderful. The journey ahead was still long, but I finally understood that it wasn't a race to the finish line. It was a path to be enjoyed, one imperfectly beautiful note at a time. Thanks for watching, and I hope this reminds you to find the joy in your own journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. See you next time. 2 years. The poster was 45 years old. They'd started at 43, and they sounded thrilled, not defeated. Sarah stopped on the corner where she'd first heard the Chopin, looking up at the studio window. Somewhere in that building, someone was playing piano. Not perfectly, maybe not even well, but they were playing. She pulled out her phone and found a recording of the nocturne. Put in her earbuds. Let the music wash over her as the rain started to fall. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't think about whether she'd ever be good enough to play it. She just listened and remembered why she'd wanted to try. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Maybe the journey didn't need to end in perfection to be worth taking. Sarah started walking home, the nocturne still playing in her ears, and made a decision. She'd go back next week. She'd tell Vera she wanted to make music, imperfectly, slowly, as an eternal beginner if that's what it took. Because the alternative, a life where she never tried, suddenly seemed much worse than a life where she tried and struggled, and maybe never reached the top of the mountain. At least she'd be climbing. Sarah's alarm went off at 5:15 a.m. It was March 2020, still dark outside her Capitol Hill apartment, and she'd been awake for the past hour anyway, her mind racing. She'd made a decision after that conversation with Vera. If she was going to do this piano thing for real, she needed to practice more, way more. She stumbled to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat down at her keyboard by 5:45. The plan was simple. Practice for 2 hours before work, then another 2 hours after dinner. 4 hours a day, every single day. That's what serious pianists did, right? She'd read somewhere that professionals practiced 6 to 8 hours daily. 4 seemed like a reasonable goal for someone with a full-time job. The first week, Sarah felt like a warrior. She was doing it. She was serious now. Her fingers flew through scales and arpeggios in the pre-dawn darkness. She worked on the batch minuet that had frustrated her before. She pushed through the tiredness, the way her back started aching after the first hour, the strange cramping in her forearms. By Friday, her fingers hurt. Actually hurt, not just tired. There was a sharp pain in her right thumb joint that wouldn't go away. She ignored it. No pain, no gain, right? That's what people said. Saturday morning, she could barely hold her coffee cup. Her hands were stiff, the joints swollen. Jennifer found her in the kitchen, flexing her fingers and wincing. "What did you do to yourself?" Jennifer asked, eyes wide. "Just practicing." "It's fine." "That doesn't look fine." "That looks like you injured yourself." Sarah waved her off and went back to the keyboard. She had a lesson with Vera on Monday, and she wanted to show real progress. She'd been practicing 4 hours a day for a whole week. Surely Vera would be impressed. But when Sarah tried to play her scales, her fingers wouldn't cooperate. They were too stiff, too sore. Every note was a struggle. She forced herself through 30 minutes of practice and gave up, close to tears. Monday's lesson was a disaster. Vera took one look at Sarah's hands and frowned deeply. "You are practicing too much." "I'm practicing 4 hours a day," Sarah said, confused. "Isn't that what I'm supposed to do?" "4 hours? Who tells you 4 hours?" Vera looked genuinely shocked. "You are beginner. Beginner practices maybe 1 hour, maybe 1.5. 4 hours you build tension, not skill. You hurt yourself." Sarah felt her face flush hot. "But professionals practice 6 or 8 hours. Professionals have been playing for 20 years. Their bodies know how to practice." "You?" Vera shook her head. "You practice like you are trying to win race. Fast, hard, pushing. This is wrong way. You must practice with relaxation, with awareness. Quality, not quantity. But if I don't practice enough, I'll never catch up." "Catch up to who? The imaginary person in your head who started at age 6? Vera's voice was sharp. "Sarah, you cannot build piano technique with force. You will only injure yourself. Then you cannot practice at all." Vera made her stop playing and just sit at the piano, practicing the feeling of relaxation in her shoulders, her arms, her hands. It felt ridiculous. She wasn't even playing music, just touching the keys gently, feeling the weight of her arms. "You practice wrong," Vera said flatly. "Everything you do with tension. I can see it from across room. Your shoulders up here," she gestured near her ears. "Your wrists rigid. Your back curved like question mark. No wonder you have pain." Sarah left that lesson feeling worse than ever. She couldn't even practice correctly. She was failing at the most basic level. The next few weeks, she tried to follow Vera's advice. Practice less, practice more gently. But it felt wrong, like she was being lazy. An hour a day didn't seem like enough. How was she supposed to get better if she wasn't pushing herself? Then in April, everything changed. The pandemic hit Seattle hard. Sarah's office sent everyone home. The music school closed for in-person lessons. Vera switched to video calls, which was awkward and frustrating. Sarah couldn't hear herself properly through the computer speakers. Vera couldn't see her hand position clearly through the webcam. But the bigger problem was Sarah's keyboard. Through the video call, Vera could see it in the background, and she'd shaken her head. "This keyboard is not good enough. The keys are too light. You practice on this, you learn bad technique." "It cost $800, Sarah protested. "Yes, and it is good for hobbyists. But you want to play Chopin? You need real piano, with weighted keys, with proper action." Sarah looked up prices for acoustic pianos that night. She bought one anyway. A used Yamaha upright from 1987, listed on Craigslist for $2,500. It took most of her savings. The guy who sold it helped her move it into her apartment building's lobby, but getting it up to her third-floor unit cost another $300 for professional piano movers. Jennifer stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You spent almost $3,000 on a piano?" Jennifer asked, watching the movers carefully navigate the upright through their apartment door. "I need it for proper technique," Sarah said, though even she wasn't sure she believed it. The piano was beautiful, she had to admit. Real wood, real ivory keys worn smooth by decades of use. It sounded completely different from her keyboard, richer, more resonant, alive. But it also showed every flaw in her playing. Every wrong note rang out clearly. Every bit of tension in her fingers was audible. Vera's first video lesson after Sarah got the piano went no better than the previous ones. "Good," Vera said when she heard the difference. "Now I can hear what you are really doing. And what you are doing is still wrong." May turned into June. Sarah practiced on her expensive piano. She took video lessons with Vera twice a week, and she made almost no progress. The same pieces she'd been working on in March were still getting her trouble. She'd try them with one hand, and they'd sound fine. But putting both hands together? It was like her brain couldn't handle it. She started watching YouTube videos obsessively, looking for the secret technique that would unlock everything. She found a popular channel run by a guy named Josh who promised to teach piano the right way. His method was completely different from Vera's. He emphasized playing by ear, learning patterns, understanding music theory deeply before attempting any pieces. Sarah tried his approach for 2 weeks. Vera noticed immediately. "Why you play like this now?" Vera asked during a video lesson. "This is not what I teach you. I'm trying a different method. From a YouTube teacher." Vera's face went cold. "I see. You do not trust my teaching." "It's not that. You think maybe this YouTube man knows better than me? He knows better than 60 years I spend playing piano, 40 years teaching?" Sarah felt terrible. She tried to explain that she was just frustrated, just looking for anything that might help. But Vera ended the lesson early. "When you decide if you want to learn from me or from internet, you let me know." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She'd insulted Vera, wasted money on a piano, spent months practicing wrong, and had nothing to show for it. She was worse now than she'd been in February, before she'd started this insane 4-hour practice schedule. In July, she found a different teacher. Marcus, the guy the receptionist had mentioned all those months ago. He came highly recommended in online forums for adult students. Very patient, everyone said. Great with beginners. Her first lesson with Marcus was on Zoom. He was maybe 35, friendly, easygoing. He listened to her play and nodded encouragingly. That's pretty good for someone who's been playing less than a year. It should have felt good to hear that. Instead, Sarah felt patronized. Pretty good wasn't good enough. She didn't want to be pretty good for a beginner. She wanted to be actually good. Marcus gave her easier pieces to work on. I think you're trying to play things that are a bit too advanced right now. Let's build a solid foundation with some simpler contemporary pieces. There's some beautiful modern music that's much more accessible than classical repertoire. I want to play Chopin, Sarah said. Marcus smiled kindly. And you will, eventually. But Chopin is really challenging, even for intermediate players. Why don't we work on some pieces by Ludovico Einaudi? They're gorgeous and much more approachable. Sarah tried it for 3 weeks. The pieces were pretty. Easy, even. She could play them without too much trouble. And she hated every second of it. This wasn't why she'd started learning piano. She didn't want accessible contemporary music. She wanted that nocturne. She wanted the waltz in A minor that Vera had mentioned as a long-term goal. She stopped taking lessons with Marcus. Stopped taking lessons altogether. Through August and into September, she just practiced alone, working through method books, attempting pieces that were probably too hard for her, getting frustrated and giving up. Her 1-year anniversary of starting piano came and went in October 2020. A whole year. She marked it by signing up for a virtual recital organized by an online adult learners community. It seemed like a safe way to perform without the pressure of a live audience. She chose Bergmüller's Arabesque, a piece that was slightly below what Vera had been teaching her, but one she could play reliably. The recital was on a Saturday afternoon. 23 adult students from around the country, all performing via video call. Sarah was number 17. She watched the others go before her. Most of them were playing simple pieces, beginner-level stuff. A few were more advanced. Nobody was playing anything remotely close to Chopin. Then a 45-year-old woman from Portland played Debussy's Clair de Lune, the famous part that everyone knows. She didn't play it perfectly. There were a few stumbles, a couple of wrong notes. But she played it with feeling, with genuine emotion, and when she finished, Sarah saw tears on the woman's face. "I've been playing for 3 years," the woman said to the group. "I started at 42, and I never thought I'd be able to play this piece. It's not perfect, but I did it." The chat exploded with congratulations and heart emojis. Sarah felt something twist in her chest, partly admiration, partly jealousy, partly despair. 3 years, and the woman was playing Debussy. Sarah had been playing for a year and was still struggling with pieces meant for first-year students. When her turn came, Sarah played her Bergmüller. She made 3 mistakes, 1 wrong note, 1 place where she completely lost her place and had to restart, and a section at the end where her hands just wouldn't coordinate. She finished, smiled awkwardly at her webcam, and muted herself while someone else performed. After the recital ended, Sarah sat alone in her apartment with the beautiful upright piano that had cost most of her savings. She opened YouTube and found a video of a pianist she'd been following, a 9-year-old girl from Korea, who'd just released a new recording. The girl was playing Chopin's Waltz in A minor, the same piece Vera had mentioned as Sarah's long-term goal. The girl was incredible. Her fingers danced across the keys with the kind of natural musicality that made it look easy. She'd probably been playing for 4 or 5 years. She was 9 years old and already playing at a level Sarah might never reach. Sarah closed her laptop and walked to her bedroom. She lay down on her bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought seriously about selling the piano. Jennifer knocked on her door around dinner time. "Hey, you okay? I heard the recital from my room. You sounded good." "I sounded terrible. You sounded like someone who's been playing for a year." Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed. "Which is exactly what you are. There was a woman who's been playing for 3 years, and she played Debussy. I can barely play a simple intermediate piece without screwing it up. So she's better than you. So what?" Sarah looked at her roommate. "So I've wasted a year of my life and thousands of dollars on something I'm never going to be good at." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you remember when we were in college and you got obsessed with rock climbing? You went to the climbing gym like 5 times a week for 2 months. That was different, was it? You weren't trying to become a professional climber. You just liked doing it. And then you stopped because it stopped being fun." Jennifer stood up. "Maybe that's the problem. You're not trying to enjoy piano. You're trying to be good at it. And that's not the same thing. After Jennifer left, Sarah sat up and looked at herself in the mirror across the room. When had this become about being good instead of about making music? When had she stopped feeling that joy she'd felt that rainy October evening? The evening light was fading, and so was my spirit. I sat there, staring at the piano keys, feeling like a total failure. I'd been at this for months, trying to master Chopin, and all I had to show for it were clumsy fingers and a heart full of frustration. It felt like I was hitting a wall, again and again. You know that feeling, right? When you pour your soul into something, but it just won't click. I thought maybe I was just too old, that the ship had sailed for me to learn something new and complex, like the piano. That night, I went to bed feeling completely defeated. But then, a thought sparked in the darkness. Maybe the problem wasn't my age or my talent. Maybe the problem was me, my ego, my impatience. The next morning, everything changed. It was a Tuesday, and I was aimlessly scrolling through my feed when an ad popped up for a local neuroscience conference. Normally, I'd just scroll past, but one session title caught my eye: The Adult Brain, Unlocking Lifelong Learning. It felt like the universe was sending me a sign. I booked a ticket on a whim, thinking, what have I got to lose? Walking into that conference hall, I was skeptical but desperate for an answer. That's when I heard Dr. Michael Torres speak. He stood on stage and began to explain the science behind how adults learn, and it was like he was speaking directly to me. Dr. Torres talked about neuroplasticity, the brain's amazing ability to rewire itself at any age. He said that learning isn't just for kids. Our adult brains are perfectly capable of mastering new skills. We just have to approach it differently. He introduced two concepts that would completely transform my practice: deliberate practice and chunking. Deliberate practice isn't just mindlessly repeating something. It's about being hyper-focused, identifying your specific weaknesses, and working on them with intention. It's about quality over quantity. And chunking? That's the magic of breaking down a massive, intimidating goal like learning a whole Chopin piece into tiny, manageable bites. He explained it with an analogy that really hit home for me as an engineer. He said, you wouldn't build a skyscraper by trying to lift the whole thing at once. You lay it brick by brick, foundation first. Suddenly, it all made sense. My frustration wasn't a sign of failure. It was a symptom of a flawed method. I was trying to eat the whole elephant in one bite. I was practicing for hours, but it wasn't deliberate. I was just reinforcing my own mistakes. Leaving that conference, I felt a surge of hope I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't broken. My process was, I had a new blueprint. Armed with this new knowledge, I decided to adopt what I now call the engineer's mindset. I went home, and instead of trying to play the entire piece, I looked at the first bar of music, just one bar. I broke it down even further. Left-hand notes, right-hand rhythm, and combining them slowly. Incredibly slowly. It was tedious at first, but for the first time, it felt controlled. It felt achievable. I spent 20 minutes just on that one bar, and by the end, I could play it perfectly. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The next day, I tackled the second bar, brick by brick. I was building my skyscraper. The hardest part was mending the relationship with my piano teacher, Vera. I had been so stubborn, so resistant to her feedback, convinced I knew better. I called her and apologized. I told her about the conference and my new approach. To my surprise, she wasn't angry. She smiled through the phone and said, Sarah, the best musicians are not just artists. They are scientists of their own craft. I've been waiting for you. Our next lesson was completely different. We worked together like collaborators, dissecting the music, setting tiny goals. We celebrated the small wins. The frustration was replaced by fascination. The journey is far from over, but now when I sit at the piano, I don't see an insurmountable mountain. I see a beautiful, complex structure waiting to be built, one note at a time. And I finally feel like I have the right tools for the job. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever felt stuck, remember, it's never too late to learn how to learn. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys like this one. Vera listened quietly. When Sarah finished, the older woman nodded slowly. This is what I have tried to tell you from beginning. You practice with emotion, not with mind. Russian method, we analyze everything first. We understand structure, harmony, why composer writes each note. Then we play. I didn't understand that before, Sarah admitted. I thought analysis would make it less musical, less emotional. No, understanding makes you free. When you understand why, then you can express how. Vera stood and walked to the piano. We start again, from beginning. But this time, we do it correctly. They restructured everything. Instead of trying to learn whole pieces, Sarah would focus on 8 measures at a time. Just 8 measures. But she'd learn them completely, deeply, analytically. For the waltz in a minor the piece, Vera had mentioned a year ago that still seemed impossibly far away. They started with the first 8 measures. That's all. Just the opening phrase. First, Vera had Sarah analyze the music without playing. What key was it in? What was the harmonic progression? Where was the melody? And where was the accompaniment? Sarah wrote notes on the sheet music, marking patterns, circling repeated motifs. Then they practiced hands separately. Right hand first, with a metronome at 60 beats per minute. Painfully slow. Sarah played those 8 measures 20 times, focusing on fingering, on smoothness, on making each note exactly the right length. Then the left hand. Another 20 repetitions. Vera made her record herself on her phone and listen back. You hear that note? It is too loud. Again. Sarah would play it again, adjusting. Only after she could play each hand perfectly separately did Vera let her put them together, still at 60 beats per minute. Still just those 8 measures. This is boring, Sarah said after 40 minutes of working on the same short section. Yes, learning is boring. This is secret nobody tells you. Vera smiled behind her mask. You want to play beautifully? First you must be bored. There is no other way. Sarah practiced those 8 measures every day for a week. Just those 8 measures. She didn't let herself move forward. When she was tempted to play ahead, to see what came next, she forced herself to stop, master this first, and move on. By the end of the week, she could play those 8 measures smoothly at 80 beats per minute. They weren't perfect, but they were good. Actually good, not just good for a beginner. At her next lesson, Vera listened to her play and nodded. Better, much better. Now we had next 8 measures. It was December 2020 by the time Sarah had the first page of the waltz learned this way. 1 page, 32 measures. It had taken her 5 weeks. At her old pace, she would have tried to sight read the whole piece in that time and played all of it badly. But now, when she played that first page, it sounded like music. Real music. The notes flowed. Her hands moved with confidence. She understood every choice she was making. You see? Vera said during a lesson right before Christmas. This is difference between playing notes and making music. Before, you play notes, hoping they become music. Now, you understand music, so notes have purpose. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had that rainy October evening 14 months ago, but different now. More solid, more real. She wasn't just dreaming about making music anymore. She was actually doing it. Jennifer noticed the change too. You sound different, she said one evening, listening from the kitchen while Sarah practiced. Like really different. More confident or something. I'm practicing differently, Sarah explained. Smaller sections. Much more focused. It's slower, but it actually works. Well, it sounds great. I mean, I still don't know what you're playing, but it sounds like real piano music now, instead of someone learning piano. That comment stuck with Sarah. Someone learning piano versus real piano music. She was finally crossing that threshold. She wasn't there yet, not even close to where she wanted to be, but she was making actual, measurable progress for the first time. The biggest test came in January 2021. Vera assigned her to record herself playing the first page of the waltz and submit it to an online adult learner showcase. Nothing fancy, just a video submission that would be posted on a website, along with hundreds of others. Sarah set up her phone on a stack of books, adjusted the angle 3 times, and started recording. She was nervous. Her hands were sweaty. But when she started playing, something clicked. All those weeks of deliberate practice, of understanding every note, of building the piece slowly and methodically. It all came together. She made one small mistake in measure 24, but she didn't stop. She didn't restart. She just kept going, the way Vera had taught her, and finished the page. When she watched the video back, Sarah almost cried. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't at the level of even an intermediate student, but it was real. She was making music that sounded like music. She submitted the video and tried not to think about it. But 3 days later, she got an email from the showcase organizers. Someone had commented on her video, "Beautiful phrasing. How long have you been playing?" Sarah wrote back honestly, "About 15 months. Started at 28. The response came quickly. "That's incredible. Your playing is very mature for that experience level. You can really hear that you understand the music." Sarah read that comment over and over. You understand the music. That's what Dr. Torres had helped her see. That's what Vera had been trying to teach her all along. She didn't need to play like a child prodigy. She needed to play like an adult who understood what she was doing and why. That evening, Sarah sat at her piano and looked at the waltz in a minor. She'd learned one page in 5 weeks. The piece was 3 pages long. At this rate, she'd have the whole thing learned in about 4 months. And then she'd need time to polish it, to bring it up to performance tempo, to really make it musical. 6 months, maybe 8, to learn one intermediate Chopin piece. That used to seem like forever. Now it seemed like a gift, because she really knew that she could do it. Not because she was talented or special, but because she'd finally figured out how to practice in a way that worked with her brain instead of against it. She turned to a fresh page in her practice journal and wrote, Week 1, page 2, measures 33 to 40. Then she set her metronome to 60 beats per minute and started again, breaking down the next small section, analyzing it, understanding it, building it piece by piece. It was slow. It was methodical. It was sometimes boring, but it was working. And for the first time since that rainy October evening 15 months ago, Sarah felt absolutely certain that she was on the right path. The recital was scheduled for October 15th, 2024, exactly 4 years after Sarah had first heard Chopin floating through the Seattle rain. She stood backstage at the Westlake School of Music, her hands trembling, listening to a teenage boy finish playing Rachmaninoff. The kid was maybe 16 and incredibly talented. Sarah tried not to compare herself. Vera appeared beside her, moving quietly despite her age. She was 79 now, a little more stooped than she'd been 4 years ago, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. You are nervous, Vera observed. It wasn't a question. Terrified, Sarah admitted. She looked down at her hands. These hands that had spent hundreds of hours breaking down music into 8-measure chunks, analyzing harmonies, practicing with a metronome. What if I mess up? Then you mess up. This is not Carnegie Hall. This is recital for students. Vera placed a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. You know what matters? 4 years ago, you could not play scale. Today, you play Chopin. This is miracle. Sarah laughed, though it came out shaky. I don't know about miracle. I do. I have taught piano for 43 years. I have seen thousands of students. Most adults who start, they quit in first year. Maybe they practice for 3 months, 6 months. They decide it's too hard. They are too old. They have no talent. But you? Vera squeezed her shoulder. You were stubborn enough to stay. The teenage boy finished his Rachmaninoff to enthusiastic applause. Sarah's stomach clenched. She was next. Remember, Vera said as Sarah walked toward the stage. You do not play for them. You play for a girl who stood in rain 4 years ago and wanted to make this music. You play for her. Sarah walked onto the small stage. About 60 people sat in the audience, students, parents, friends. She spotted Jennifer in the 3rd row, giving her an encouraging thumbs up. Her parents had flown in from Bellevue, looking slightly confused about why their daughter was performing at a piano recital at age 32, but supportive nonetheless. She sat at the Steinway Grand, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The same keys where Vera had first showed her middle C 4 years ago, where she'd struggled through her first scales, her first simple pieces, her first moments of wanting to quit. Sarah took a breath, and then she began playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Opus 9, number 2, the piece that had started everything. The opening notes floated into the room, delicate and melancholic. Sarah's fingers moved through the familiar patterns she'd practiced thousands of times. She made it through the first section cleanly, her heart pounding but her hands steady. Then came the middle section, the technically challenging part with the rapid runs and ornaments. This was where she'd worried she might stumble. But her fingers knew what to do. All those hours of deliberate practice, of breaking down each measure, of understanding why each note existed, it had built something solid in her muscle memory. She wasn't perfect. In measure 34, she rushed slightly, her nerves getting the better of her. In measure 47, one of the ornaments wasn't as clean as she'd wanted. But she kept going, just like Vera had taught her. Mistakes weren't failures. They were just part of the performance. As she played, something shifted. She stopped thinking about the audience, about whether she was good enough, about comparing herself to that teenage boy or to child prodigies on YouTube. She just played. She let herself feel the music the way she felt it that rainy evening 4 years ago, the sadness and hope intertwined, the beauty of what Chopin had created. When she reached the final measures, Sarah played them slowly, letting each note ring out. The last chord hung in the air for a moment before fading. The audience applauded. Sarah stood and bowed, her legs shaky, her heart racing. As she walked off stage, she saw Vera in the wings. The old woman had tears running down her cheeks. "You played with your heart," Vera said, pulling Sarah into a hug. "Not perfect, but with heart. This is what matters." After the recital, people came up to congratulate her. Her parents hugged her, her father looking bewildered but proud. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said. "Neither did I," Sarah admitted. A woman approached her, maybe in her mid-40s. "Excuse me, I just wanted to say I started piano lessons last month. I'm 44, and watching you play gives me hope that I can actually do this." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "You can. It's hard and it takes time, but you absolutely can. Just don't give up in the first year. That's when it's hardest." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with Jennifer, drinking wine and eating Thai takeout to celebrate. Her fingers were sore, but in a good way, the kind of sore that comes from accomplishment rather than injury. "So what's next?" Jennifer asked. "Now that you've conquered Chopin?" Sarah laughed. "I haven't conquered Chopin. I've learned one piece. There's like 200 more." She paused, thinking. "But actually, I've been talking to Vera about something. She thinks I should start teaching." "Teaching? You?" "I know. It sounds crazy. But she says I understand how adult learners think because I am one. And there are so many adults who want to learn piano but don't know where to start." The idea had been percolating for months. Sarah had joined online communities for adult learners, and she kept seeing the same questions, the same frustrations, the same feelings of being too old or not talented enough. She remembered that despair so clearly, the sense that she'd started too late and would never be good enough. But she'd been wrong. She wasn't as good as someone who'd started at 6. She never would be. But she was good enough to play music she loved, to experience the joy of making something beautiful, to help others do the same. 2 weeks after the recital, Sarah taught her first piano lesson. Her student was a 52-year-old accountant named Robert, who'd always wanted to learn, but thought he was too old. They met on a Saturday morning at the music school, in one of the small practice rooms. "I have to warn you," Robert said nervously. "I have no musical background at all. I don't even know how to read sheet music." Sarah smiled. "That's okay. Neither did I when I started. I was 28, completely clueless. Couldn't play a single note. And now you play Chopin?" "Now I play one Chopin piece." After 4 years of work, Sarah sat beside him at the piano. "Here's what I've learned. Being an adult learner is different from being a kid. We can't learn the same way they do. We need to understand things, not just repeat them. We need to practice smarter, not longer. And we need to be patient with ourselves." She showed him middle C, the same note Vera had shown her 4 years ago. She explained the method she'd learned from Dr. Torres, breaking things into small pieces, deliberate practice, working with the adult brain instead of against it. "The key," Sarah said, "is to forget about where you think you should be and focus on where you actually are. 8 measures at a time. 1 week at a time. Small, consistent progress. By the end of that first lesson, Robert could play a simple 5-finger exercise with both hands. It wasn't much, but his face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "I'm playing piano," he said, almost disbelieving. "You are," Sarah confirmed. And she understood exactly how he felt. Over the next few months, Sarah took on 3 more adult students. A 37-year-old nurse named Patricia, a 61-year-old retired teacher named George, a 29-year-old software developer named Mike, who de-started piano the same time Sarah had but quit after 6 months. She taught on weekends, fitting lessons around her day job. She hung a sign in her studio space, a small room she rented at the music school, for $200 a month. The sign said, "It's never too late, but you do have to practice smarter." Vera came to visit her one Saturday afternoon, watching from the doorway as Sarah worked with Patricia on a simple batch minuet. After the lesson ended, Vera nodded approvingly. "You are a good teacher," she said. "You know why? Because you remember what it is like to be a beginner, to be frustrated, to want to quit. You have empathy." "I learned from the best," Sarah said. "No, you learned from failure, from struggle. This is better teacher than any person." Vera smiled. "I am proud of you, not because you play Chopin, because you did not give up." That night, Sarah sat at her piano, the same Yamaha upright she'd bought in desperate hope 4 years ago. She pulled out the nocturne and played through it, not for an audience, not for a lesson, just for herself, just to remember. She wasn't as good as someone who'd started at 6. The teenage boy at the recital had played Rachmaninoff with more technical facility than she might ever achieve. Child prodigies on YouTube could play circles around her, but she could play Chopin, maybe not perfectly, maybe not at the level of a concert pianist, but well enough to feel the music, to understand it, to share it with others. And 4 years ago, that had seemed impossible. Sarah thought about that rainy October evening, standing on the sidewalk, hearing music float down from a second-floor window. She thought about walking into the music school, nervous and hopeful. She thought about Vera's words that first day. "You are very late." She had been late. She still was late compared to most serious musicians. But she'd learned something that mattered more than starting early. She'd learned that some dreams don't have expiration dates. They just have different timelines. Her phone buzzed. A text from Robert, her 52-year-old student. "I practiced for an hour today, and I can finally play both hands together on that exercise. I know it's just a simple piece, but I am so excited, I can't stop smiling." Sarah smiled too. She texted back, "That's not just a simple piece. That's proof you can do this. Keep going." She set her phone down and looked around her apartment. At the piano that had cost most of her savings. At the stack of music books she'd accumulated. At the practice journal where she'd logged thousands of hours of work over 4 years. It hadn't been easy. She'd wanted to quit at least a dozen times. She'd cried, gotten frustrated, felt inadequate, compared herself to everyone who was better than her. She failed and failed and failed again before she finally figured out how to practice in a way that worked. But she'd stayed. She'd been stubborn enough to keep trying even when it seemed hopeless. And that stubbornness, that refusal to give up on something she loved, had made all the difference. Sarah played through the nocturne one more time, her fingers moving through the patterns she knew so well now. The music filled her apartment, washing over her like it had that first rainy evening. She wasn't perfect, but she was real. And she was making music. Her own music, earned through years of hard work and determination, and refusing to believe she was too old to start something new. The last notes faded into silence. Sarah sat at the piano for a moment longer, her hands resting on the keys, and felt a deep sense of contentment. Not because she'd reached some final destination. She still had so much to learn, so many pieces she wanted to master, but because she'd proven something important. It's never too late to become the person you want to be, to learn the skill you've always dreamed of learning, to make the music you've always wanted to make. You just have to be willing to start where you are, work with what you have, and refuse to give up when it gets hard. 4 years ago, Sarah Chen couldn't play a single note. Today, she played Chopin. Not perfectly, but with understanding, with heart, with the kind of hard-won grace that only comes from refusing to quit. And if she could do it, maybe anyone could. You just had to be stubborn enough to try.